This episode is brought to you by Adaptive, the software for builders that automates draws, budgets, and bookkeeping with AI. For over a year now, I've been partnered with Adaptive, and they've just been an amazing game changer in terms of efficiency in our time and all our bookkeeping. From the time we get an invoice, we import it into their system. The AI codes it, cost codes it, job codes it. All we have to do is review it, pass it through the people internally in the office, all digitally, and then it gets approved and paid all via ACH. It's becoming extremely fast and saving us countless hours a day and a week. When it comes to draws, all of our budgets now are set in Adaptive as well. So now when we cost code against the draws, we can do our change orders, and then with a click of a button, we can submit these draws to our title companies or to our homeowners for faster payment. If you're looking to save time, and if you're looking to be accurate, I highly recommend Adaptive. Additionally, if you'd like to listen to one of their founders share the story of Adaptive, you can listen to episode number 15 on the Curious Builder podcast. On today's podcast, we had Katlyn Slocum. It's really neat because she focuses only on construction industry websites. I really appreciate how she niches down and really focuses on, that demographic. And I love how that her passion, her fuel is really driven by the clients that she serves. She has a ton of information. So if you're looking for good tips on how to drive more conversions to your website or to get more traffic, we're going to dive into all the nitty gritty on this episode. So without further ado, let's talk to Katlyn. Welcome to the Curious Builder podcast. I'm Mark Williams, your host. Today I'm joined with Katlyn Slocum from Katlyn Slocum Design. Thanks for coming on, Katlyn.
Yeah, thank you, Mark.
Where in the world are you calling in from today?
Little town called Williamsburg, Ohio. My family just relocated here from Washington State last July. So we've been here almost a year.
That's right. I think actually you had reached out to me. I think the podcast is coming up now almost 2 years, and you had reached out to me, I want to say like 6 months into it. And then, we had some scheduling stuff, but I remember specifically because I have some friends and family in Washington, and it wasn't until right now that you mentioned you're in Ohio. I was like, oh yeah, she moved. I totally forgot about that.
I had just moved, I think, when I reached out to you. Yeah, I was living, my whole family was living in our friend's, like one room in our friend's house. I was sitting there at my desk emailing you. So it's been a good transition though. We're super happy here.
Excellent. Well, for those that aren't familiar with you, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your company, and we'll kind of dive into that.
Yeah. So for those who don't know me, again, my name's Katlyn Slocum, and I am a web designer specifically for home builders. Actually, how it started was more just overall trades and construction. I kind of niched into that industry because all of my relatives owned their own businesses in the trades. My grandpa opened his mechanic shop like the year I was born, and he just closed it and retired, and so he had that for 30 years. My dad and my other grandpa were in HVAC. I worked for my stepdad, who still owns a roofing company in southern Minnesota, Rochester area. So it's just like a familiar space, and then kind of transitioned into home builders because I liked the design and the aesthetic that goes into building custom homes. But yeah, I think this is my 6th year of business, and it's just kind of like slowly grown over time. And I've really focused, just like finding that sweet spot and the type of people that I serve and the niche that I'm in. And it's been helpful to kind of hone in on an area because I really get to know the type of businesses that I'm working with, what their unique problems or challenges are, and it has helped me like kind of become an expert in the things that they're needing to help propel their businesses forward. So it's been fun.
You definitely picked an industry that needs a lot of help. As a stereotype, I assume most construction companies are pretty male dominated. We celebrate our women in construction for sure. But I think just like, having been married for 10 years now, it's like your wife telling you need to update your brand. You need to get a new shirt, a new truck. It's like sometimes, men in particular, I don't know what it is about us that we're just like, hey, it's not broken. Let's not fix it. And I look around and I'm like, there is a lot of really, 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 really bad websites. The only thing worse than a really, really bad website is no website. Actually, now that I think about it, I think no website might be better than a bad website.
So, yeah.
You think that's true?
Yes, 100%. Because what you put out there, as far as like your online presence is what you're going to attract. Or like if somebody's looking at a website or a business card or whatever it is that your branding is, and it looks thrown together and sloppy, it's that human part of us that's like, well, if they won't even put time into this, like, are they just going to slop together my job? Like, it doesn't evoke trust or
Well, and it
rapport,
becomes
really.
such an incredible tool. I mean, I think it's easy to, I could probably get a little caught up in the other way where you get so obsessed and excited about, the brand and the experience, the user experience. And I really can appreciate a really good website, especially when you redesign it and you kind of update it. But you still have to be a good builder. And I feel like it's important for your website to also match your brand.
Yeah.
Have you found, I mean, you kind of have an endless supply of potential clients.
Yeah.
I guess let's start there. How do most people find you? And how do you seek out companies? I feel like there's an endless supply of people that need your services.
Yeah. So when I first started out, I worked with a lot of family, friends, like people I went to church with who owned businesses. And so I kind of started there because web design was not like my path. I did not go to school for this. I kind of fumbled into it by like necessity because I lost my job. The startup I was working for went out of business the day after I found out I was pregnant with my second. So it was somebody who encouraged me to I was doing some work for them and they're like, you should just make this a business. And I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. um
How old were you
but
at the time?
uh that's a good question. Well, I guess probably like 24.
Yep.
I was really shortly out of school. Um and I had a child at the time. I was just kind of like all over the place. I was newly married, new in a new state, had a kid basically right after we got married, graduated after like I was going to school after having our firstborn, and then I found a job and got pregnant again, and it was just like this whole thing. So after working with some friends and family, I freelanced for a while. You might have heard of sites like Fiverr or Upwork,
Oh,
and
sure. Yep.
you can hire freelance designers. And so I use that as an opportunity to kind of play around with a variety of web platforms, like from WordPress to GoDaddy to Shopify. And just because I was so new to it and I'd never done it before, I was just really like, just playing around and trying to figure out what I liked and what I was good at and what made sense for me. After that, I got into a local business networking group when I decided I actually like this business could go somewhere. For the longest time, it was like just to make ends meet. I was doing odd jobs here and there just to put food on the table. But then it actually kind of, I was taking interest in it. And I like working. And so I was like, I could actually do this if I, put forth the effort. So I joined a local business networking group, got my initial branding done for very, very affordable, just to kind of like, I don't know, put something semi professional together. Um, Started networking with this group of people, got some jobs through there. And it was just like a slow refining process. Like as I learned more in the industry and as I worked with more people, I just refined until getting like to the place I am now where I have a super clear vision, super clear branding, experience, like just all the things that I was building over these 5 or 6 years. So now today, I guess my biggest way that I market is by doing stuff like this, honestly, like podcasts, and I call them partnerships because they can um be a bunch of different ways. It can be podcasts, it can be, getting on an Instagram live with somebody in a different industry but who's following or whatever. Maybe there's something there where there's similarities. Like I might partner with a copywriter who serves builders or who serves the construction industry, and they don't do web design, they do copywriting, but it's kind of a natural fit because the two services go hand in hand. Online webinars where I just give free knowledge and kind of teach, and then if people have questions or are interested in my services, come to me through there. um, but I found it's like the best return on my investment of time, because I'm getting right in front of the people I want to help and the people I want to work with. And I learned that through a program that I went through for web designers who are wanting to grow and scale their business. And it's been great. It's been like my favorite
It reminds me
way
a
to
little
market.
it reminds me a little bit, as a custom home builder, I sometimes will think about like where do I put advertising or, print advertising or things like that.
Mhm.
And someone once told me, fish where the sorry, you should go fishing where fish eat. And
Mhm.
I've always appreciated that concept, and I'm in Minneapolis area, and so, there's, let's say, certain high-end restaurants literally, as well
Yeah.
as, like, maybe shopping districts or zip codes where, people that are affluent and we build a pretty high-end home and,
Mhm.
there's pretty stereotypes. There's places that they shop, places that they visit, and you can do geofencing, and target those areas. It was kind of new to me 4 or 5 years ago. We would geo-target, certain locations, and so
Yeah.
I didn't realize that this was even it sounds very like NSA or Jason Bourne, where basically, if your cell phone, enables tracking, which obviously a lot of them do with, GPS and whatnot. If you walk into, let's say, a jewelry store, a Rolex store, a fancy shop, or a shopping mall, like if you have geocached that area, like their phone is going to be push notifications. I was kind of blown away by that. But
Yeah, that's so interesting.
where I'm going with this is, you obviously want to get in front of builders and,
Mhm.
let's say our podcast, for instance, I believe there's a lot of builders across the country that listen to it. And so it's really smart and savvy of you. I could kind of tell that was a motivation. Plus I wanted to talk with you. We have a mutual friend in Brad Levitt, and,
Mhm.
you had recently designed his whole website as well. I think
Mhm.
actually when I first met Brad, was it 2 years ago, almost actually right now in May, it was down in Nashville at their contractor coalition, because the contractor coalition's coming to Minneapolis here,
I know, I
in the
wanted
middle of
to
May.
go.
And I'm really
Go
excited
back
because
home and visit my dad up in
yeah,
the
yeah,
he lives up in
come
Minneapolis.
on up. We'll give you a ticket. Well, we're doing this thing called Build Buzz the night to open for it. And
Cool.
so, I'll be hosting, Brad, Nick, Morgan, and
Yep.
Nick, and you were also on the Modern Craftsman as well. And
Mhm.
so again, between, all these different builder podcasts, that I assume you've gotten a lot of leads. And that was one of my questions. After you go on a podcast, and Brad's podcast has been around for 7, 8 years, so his is a much bigger audience. But what kind of outreach in the, let's say, 2 weeks after yours airs, like how many people reach out to you? Like, what's it like?
Yeah, it really depends on the podcast. So when I was in this program for web designers and she's talking about partnerships, the first thing she has us do is um, basically put a list of 20 to 30 potential partnerships. Some are going to be difficult to get, medium difficulty, easy, things like that. Um, and so I kind of just started my search with like, okay, what do construction industry, professionals listen to, like that kind of same thing. Where do they shop? What do they listen to? What do they read? And so I started with a Google search of like, top construction podcasts. And so I wrote this whole list down, reached out to all of them. Brad's was one of them. And I had no idea who Brad was. I had no idea how large his following was. Like I probably went to his Instagram at some point and I was like, okay, like he's got a decent amount of followers. But it was already after I had reached out to him. And he responded right away with having me on there. So I was like, okay, that's awesome. Um, and I had done a couple podcasts before his and didn't really get people hitting me up. I don't know if they just were the wrong type of market or didn't have as big of a following or whatever, but it was good practice for me to just start doing podcasting. After my episode on Brad's launch, yeah, it was a lot more vocal. I did get more kind of like emails and just saying like, "Hey, I listened to your podcast." And I did get a few leads from that. Most of the leads I got was actually after I worked with Brad and he posted his
So
website. I had like 80 followers in a day. I think I had 15 calls scheduled in like a week or two period. That was insane. But
that
yeah,
was
like Brad's when Brad had me do his website, like that was totally unexpected. I
yeah,
was like, I'm
how did I
so
was gonna ask you about that. So what was the
yeah,
you had actually so I didn't know that story. I thought maybe you were already working with him beforehand, and then you
no.
came on the podcast. So you reached out to him, you went on his podcast. At what
Yeah.
point was he walk us through that evolution. I think this is really fascinating.
Yeah.
Of like,
So
why did
like,
he choose you? Because you would obviously would know a lot of different people, and
yeah.
then walk us through that kind of that maturation cycle. And
Yeah. So I basically we had a great, like, really organic conversation on the podcast. He was asking all different questions about web design. He's been in business for over 10 years. So I'm sure he's had plenty of these conversations before. He had a website, he was doing some SEO and things like that. So we were just having a conversation about web design and strategy and branding and story brand, like how important messaging is and things like that. So after the podcast, he was just like, "Oh, that was really great. Like, I enjoyed that conversation," and thanked me. And then he followed up a couple days later and was like, "Hey, a lot of what you were talking about really resonated with, like, my values and what I find important and things like that." And he's like, "I've been looking to redo my website. Why don't we have a conversation?" And so, like, that was totally unexpected, but I hopped on a call with him. We kind of talked about what his needs and his goals were, and then, like, the rest is history. I don't know, he
uh,
hired me and here we go.
yeah,
But
that's
that was,
great.
like, not the goal of my
Yeah,
like, going on his podcast at all. But, no, it was awesome.
I
It
mean,
was
yeah,
super
that's
cool.
a
He was
that's
he was, like, kinda my first, launch into the custom home builder side,
mhm,
in the niching there, because I was still more in, like, the general construction space. And so obviously, like, building a site for someone who does these beautiful, just stunning homes, like, visually, it's a lot more fun to put together a site like that than, like, a plumbing website. No offense.
right.
It's just, like, a lot more to work with
Well, I think,
aesthetically.
one of the things that I appreciate about your website, I think you had something in there about, I think you were speaking about your family that were builders and own their own businesses, but it said,
Mm,
that, other people's passion fuels your passion. And
mm,
I think that's really a succinct way of saying that, passionate people are inspired by passionate people.
yeah.
And I'm curious to see like how, um, how does it show up in a story brand? I mean, I know my thoughts on a story brand, but tell the audience a little bit, like, why are stories so powerful and how do you weave, let's talk a little bit about how you even design a website. I'd love to hear how you interweave this brand of a story, the messaging. Yeah, maybe just tell us a little bit about like, just like building a house, you dig the
Yep.
foundation, you obviously you've got the framing, you've got the mechanicals, and it's an evolution of a process. And I think there's a lot of similarities with working with a brand and with working with a website. Can you kind of
Mhm.
speak in those terms?
Yeah, absolutely. I compare the two a lot as well because there's so many elements that come together to make a successful site. Like you said, you have the foundation, you have the framing, you have the interior design, you have, all these elements, the architecture. Um, so I guess, like, if we're talking about how I go through my process, the first step I do with everybody is really find out what their needs are, which is usually done on a consult call where I can just kind of figure out what's working in their business and what's not working. And then from there, we can determine what needs to be fixed or built. So for some, they have a website that, I guess, conversion wise does really well, but they're struggling with their traffic. So for them, the focus of their site might be optimizing their site for search engines so that they can generate more traffic and bring in that many more leads. For others, their traffic is great, but they're not converting on any of that traffic. So they might be spending thousands of dollars on ads or marketing and driving all these people to their website, but they're not getting any inquiries. And so the missing piece for them might be website strategy, how the site is actually laid out and put together. It might be their messaging where they're just not resonating with their ideal client. A lot of people that I work with are working with one type of client and they want to get to, they're like, we're building $500,000 homes. We want to be doing $3 million homes. Like, they've gotten a couple of those and that's the direction that they want to be going. And so everything then from the written messaging on your site, your branding, like the visual aesthetic of your site, um, and how you structure the site is then needs to be geared to a different audience. If you have a website that looks like it's just your everyday builder or remodeler, you're going to bring in a lot of those kind of like low ball clients who are price shopping and, maybe more of a headache rather than the high-end clientele you're trying to attract. So the first part is really figuring out, where are you now? Where do you want to go? And then we can start putting a plan or a blueprint together of what pieces do we need to make this happen. So for as many of my clients as I can, I try to incorporate story brand. I don't do it personally, but I have people on my team that I partner with. Um, Paul Kuthi, who is also on Brad Levitt's podcast, he actually did some story brand for Brad for his new site, the Live Like You're on Vacation. And the words that are on Brad's site was the brainchild of, those story brand strategic sessions we had with Paul to really get Brad's story out there. And story is not just your company, like who you are. I totally agree with you. People want to work with people who are passionate, who really care about what they do, but who will care about you as the consumer or the client. And that's what story brand's about, is about speaking directly to the needs and wants and desires and fears and anxieties of your ideal client. And so that requires you coming out of your business and the day-to-day, like all the things you deal with, to really seek to understand who the people are that you want to be working with. Where do they live? Do they have families? What are their interests? When it comes to the service you offer, whatever it might be, building new homes or renovating or whatever that is, what are they scared of? What questions do they have about the process? You have to know
That's
those
an
things in order to speak to them. And yeah.
that's an interesting part. I was going to ask you about this because, and maybe this is my fallacy. So, and maybe it's my personality. I'm an extreme optimist. I tend to think about aspirational things. So if I'm going to dream, and I think, building a home is sort of a dream that a lot of people have, and it's
Mhm.
sort of tied in with the whole American dream and of home ownership and what that means to people, in particularly the United States, it seems like. But where I was going with this question is, I feel like when I showcase stuff, it's, you want to showcase a lot of your best work. You want to showcase,
Yes.
the things that are aspirational. So a lifestyle. I remember early on trying to key in when I would meet with someone, like, what kind of lifestyle are you trying to gain? And I'd ask a lot of personal questions about, their children, their habits, the time they wake up and go to sleep and what they watch and what they read or how they exercise or all those kinds of things, because I was trying to paint a picture of a lifestyle that could be
Yeah.
attained with the home that we would build them. But you've mentioned several times now about fears. I've never actually considered even that side of the coin to even talk about fears. Why is understanding their fears important?
I would say it's a mix of the two. So usually in story brand, there's an aspirational section. I think Brad actually has it on his own site, where it's like, imagine stepping into your backyard and it's like Oasis. Imagine um welcoming friends and family home and just relax, or like whatever it is. So you're putting those aspirational things out there, because then if I'm sitting on his website or whoever's website and I'm reading those things, I'm like, yes, 100%, I want that. So you do still need to speak to the aspirational things 100%. The fears, I would say, is important, because more on differentiating yourselves from maybe your competitors, or what is holding them back from making the buying decision, and showing that this thing that you're scared of, this thing that you're anxious about, we've got you. We understand, number one, that you feel those scary, anxious things, and that's normal. So you're validating whatever they're feeling, and then you're showing them, we understand, we care about that, and this is how we do things to alleviate. So that's kind of like the problem solving side of things. So for a lot of my clients, they might bring up, I'll ask them, is this do most of your clients, is this their first custom home, or have they built before? And most of the people I work with, the clients that they serve, this is their second or third home. So they have experiences from the first time they built that makes them hesitant to
Right.
go through it again, or makes them really have to fine tune everybody, or go through with a fine tooth comb to find the right builder for them. Maybe their priority is a clean job site, or maybe it's staying on budget because their last project was, no communication. They didn't stay on budget. Maybe their pain point is the builder they worked with previously didn't understand their needs, or whatever that baggage is that they're carrying with them. These are all things that they're looking to like be alleviated before they feel confident to work with you. And so to address the things that they're worried about, and to assure them that this time is going to be different and this is why, it just helps build trust, and it gets them closer to that buying decision. So
Uh,
both parts are definitely important in building the story.
Interesting. How, in the placement of like videos and images, yeah, because when you were talking about, on Brad's website, that you would read, my first question is like, does anybody even read? Number one, like the biggest turnoff for me is if I go to a website and there's just a ton of content
Right.
in the
Yeah.
form of words, like I'm checking out, like,
Mhm.
and you can look obviously on the back end, because I check, maybe once a month with our marketing team of, where are people spending time on the website, what's
Oh, good
attracting
for
them,
you. Yeah.
and how do you, maybe how do you move stuff around? I mean, obviously, I know my website extremely well. I would assume
Yep.
everyone would know it, but obviously that's not the case. And so that was, I guess, my first question is, the print and giving people information versus, pretty photos. How do
Yeah.
you, balance that? Because you've got information which is needed, and if people really know you beforehand, it's going to help them. And some people, not every person is like another person, right? So I mean,
Yep.
I tend to, well, I like bullet points. I'll skim
Yeah.
stuff. I don't want to read, novels and novels of information. I'm going to be on there for you. Well, you could probably tell me how many seconds somebody's actually probably on a page. And so you've got to grab their attention pretty quickly. So how do you balance content, which is very great when I'm saying content, let's
Eh?
call it copyright, versus like, let's say photos. And I'll say video for my next question.
Yeah, so I think if you have a very visual product or service, which for builders you do, like your finished product of your homes that speaks a thousand words. But like you said, number one, there's different types of consumers. You have your researchers who want a ton of information about the process, and I have all these questions and answer them, and they're going to read your blogs and whatever. You have more normal people who kind of they're looking for maybe specific things, and they're just kind of flying through the site to find who knows what. It's very hard because before I even got into web design, I was doing, I had a lot more search, SEO contracts, month SEO contracts. So what my skill set was taking a website, ranking it to number one on Google, and then basically selling leads to whatever,
Interesting.
company I was working with. So maybe I built a landscaping site. I'd rank it number one on Google. So it'd generate calls and forms, like actual people who wanted to work with them. And then I would rent the site basically out to local landscapers who didn't have an online presence. So I still actually have a client right now in Washington still who's a local lawn care guy. I send him leads and he pays me for them. So when I was doing that, content is such a big thing with optimizing your site for Google, because Google's whole job and how they make money is to get the most relevant website in front of their users as quickly as possible. And so content is so important on your website. So Google can see, okay, this is what this company does. These are the services they offer. If you have a blog, if you're answering relevant questions and things that people have on your website, Google's able to match you with those searches. So the more content, the better for search engine optimization. But as I've gotten more into web design and the strategy of web design, like I could drive a ton of traffic through SEO, but then once they're there, are they converting? And so this is kind of like this new realm that I've got into of like, where is that balance between we want this site to show up on Google and increase traffic, but we also want to capture as many of those as much of that traffic as possible. And that cannot be done when your whole site is just like jam packed with content in a super disorganized or like overwhelming way. I see a ton of builder websites that are doing all the right things as far as search engine optimization. They have downloads, they have blog posts, they have pages and pages of this is who we are, this is what we do. They have several service pages for all the different services they offer. but I call like, so the navigation up at the top's got like 20 links and you got drop downs and it's like so overwhelming. I call them like cheesecake factory menu websites because
Oh,
it's like
that's very accurate.
information overload. Yeah. And as we know, like you would, they're really well meaning. It's like, oh, I'm just giving them everything. But if I go to a restaurant that has 5 choices versus like 300 choices, it's going to be so much easier and simpler for me to make a decision at with a simplified menu than, like it's just too much for our brains to handle. So website strategy, which is what I specialize in, is finding the balance between the visual and the content, number one, that Google needs, but also that the consumers need, and then how we lay out the content um, to be in an eye-catching or very short, succinct clips. So like I might have a section, that aspirational section, which is like, imagine life if check mark, check mark, check mark. And it's like 5 things. Like people can read and scan through that very quickly and say, oh yeah, like that's what I want out of my life. And you can have an FAQ section with drop downs. So it's not just a bunch of, text clumps all in a row. They can click on the questions that are applicable to read and not be overwhelmed by just looking at this whole screen of, all these questions. And so it definitely is a very fine balance of bringing in the strategy, the story, and the SEO in a way that it maximizes traffic, but also maximizes conversions.
How do you is
Yeah.
there a industry standard in the sense, like, if you get 1,000 hits on your website, and what is a conversion? Is a conversion I mean, obviously, this is so dependent. I mean, I'm a luxury
It
home
is.
builder, I
Yeah.
build 4 or 5 homes a year, so it's like I don't I couldn't handle 100 anyway, so I know
Yeah.
it depends. This is a hard question to answer, but, they'll say sometimes, like, on Instagram, like, if you get a 3%, anything above 3% in terms of, like, comments or interactions to a post
Okay.
is like, anyway, where I'm going with this is like, if there are business owners out there looking at their analytics and they see that they get, let's just use the metric of 1,000 hits in a
Okay.
month, what should they be shooting for in terms of conversion rates as a general rule? And would a conversion also be like someone subscribes to your newsletter? Does that count as, like, quote, a conversion? Because a lot of times, like, I know both my websites have it, that if you're new to the website, it prompts you, like most
Mhm.
do you want to be a subscriber for our blogs? I think we'll talk about blogs here in a little bit, because I was very much a skeptic, and I'd like to tell my coming to
Yeah, please.
bloghood story here in a minute. But walk us through, like, what are some good metrics to actually shoot for conversion?
Yeah. So again, like you mentioned, it's so dependent on your industry. Um, what I try to shoot for my clients is standard or average, which is a 3 to 5% conversion rate. And a conversion rate, it really depends on what you want to track. So for some people, they want the phone ringing. Other people want um a
Yeah.
web form filled out. That's their process. Another metric might be, hey, we want to grow our email list, which is super important as a builder because of, especially if you have a high price point service, you need a lot of touch points until people get to the point where they're gonna make that buying decision. So building your email list and then nurturing those leads is a great way to help with that. So that would be a separate thing that you track. So it really just depends business to business, like what you're looking to improve upon. But a conversion would be if 1,000 people land on your website. Now you're going to make me do math. Let's say 100 people land on your website, 3 to 5 web
Yeah. So
form inquiries
3%.
will
Yeah.
come in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's,
I
I
would
mean,
say
that's,
3 to 5%.
yeah.
Now that's like internet, like that's like average, so that's going to be
Right.
like every industry. That's kind of like what to shoot for. So with a higher price point you might have less,
Mhm.
1 to 2. But the important thing is that number one, what your number is, and then you can seek to improve that. So no matter where my clients fall, um if they're wanting to increase their conversion rates, number one, I can tell them, yeah, that's absolutely reasonable. I can see XYZ things that we can do, even in your market and even with your price point that can get you there. And then we seek for that improvement. A lot of builders, like you said, they're at capacity. They don't necessarily need more, but they want higher quality. So the type of leads that come in, they want to be their ideal client. They want to be more pre-qualified. And so that's something that we aim for. But yeah, it depends on what you're looking to measure. And then we know with a service-based business, and it's the same for me, I'll have my website conversion. So somebody goes to my website, they fill out my form and book a call. Then I have my sales process, and there's a conversion rate of out of how many people got on a phone call with me, booked me, and then that's a separate conversion rate. So my job is getting the user to take the action, and then you as a builder then take the sales process over, and you have your own like sales conversion rate.
Yep, that's
So
your first touch point. I mean,
yeah,
for us specifically, it's a 15-minute phone call followed
yeah,
by a 1-hour meeting. And then at that point, if they're not on our design retainer, they're not a good fit. We've tried to shorten that. When I first started 20 years ago, you would take any phone call, anything, and
yeah,
you would hunt it down. And, it seems like now it's sort of frustrating because I still like a phone and I will, always have my phone number on there. But it's interesting because most modern websites, there's no phone number on there. And
uh-huh.
and they want to funnel you through their process. And it's funny because I assume you get. Actually, this is a question I was going to save for later, but I'll ask it now. How often? I get probably 3 to 5 emails a week that I'll call them spam. Like, hi,
Mhm.
my name is Bob, and I just happen to be on your website, and I noticed that while it's a very
Yes.
good website, your SEO could use a boost. I'd love to give you a free analysis of a website. So I'm quite as someone who
Isn't it
does this for a
fun?
living. How often do you get that email?
Oh, all the time.
This is
All the
amazing.
time. The
Okay, good.
SEO and web design ones where they'll be like, it's so clear that they don't really know what you do because I'm a web designer and they'll come to me and they want to help my clients with web design. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, this is what I do.
Right, it's so
So
awesome.
I don't
I
know.
love
No,
I
I
love
get,
it. Okay,
I get
so yeah,
those all
I mean, I kind of figured that was the case, but I
the time.
thought I had to ask the question. This episode is brought to you by Pella Northland. For 19 and a half years, I've been building homes, and 95% of all of my homes have used Pella windows. I couldn't be happier to call them a partner in our builds and our remodels. Whether you're an architect, a designer, or a remodeler, I'd highly recommend Pella windows. They can fit old homes, new homes, reclaimed, commercial, and really everything in between. Pella is a company that we trust and that we recommend to our clients. Additionally, in management, Peter and Ed have just been absolute fantastic people to work with, as well as mentors to me personally. So when it comes time to look for a window, I'd highly recommend Pella Windows. Find more at pellanorthland.com. Also, if you're interested, you can hear episode 1 where I interview Peter and Ed together for a great listen on business and Pella Windows. Lake Society Magazine is Minneapolis' premier target market boutique lifestyle and design publication. It embodies the unique lifestyles and design of the Minneapolis City Lakes neighborhoods. From Lake of the Isles to Lake Harriet, it showcases the best in local design projects by both premier builders, architects, and interior designers in this area. Lake Society Magazine has the look and feel of a national publication with glossy covers, high-end finishes. It's mailed directly to upper bracket single-family homeowners in the City Lakes area, and it's the perfect local coffee tabletop publication. Subscriptions can also be available through the website lakesocietymagazine.com. Additionally, publisher and founder Karen Steckel has over 27 years in the local magazine publishing industry and has a passion for high-end photography and quality graphics. Her commitment to quality, visual simplicity, and beauty are strongly reflected in her beautiful Lake Society magazine. I also, by the way, I think it's really smart that you're in such a niche, and obviously that particular niche is like as big as the ocean, as we previously discussed. I mean, there's a lot of builders. I was going to ask one. Well, let me ask this question first, going back to images. So, what? Maybe I'll share an experience to see if this
Yeah.
resonates with what you found over your last 6 years. So, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we did some long format video and it was gorgeous, amazing home. And so I hired a videography company before that was kind of what we did. It was, but it was expensive. I mean, first rate photography, video is very expensive. And, I thought for sure I'd put it on my website. People would be blown away at the quality. It was cinematic. It was like, the trailer to an amazing movie, Dances with Wolves intro. I mean, it was whatever. It was great. And, nobody watched it. People would go to my portfolio and they'd look at your photos and they click, through, and you'd look at how much time people spent on videos. And it was weird because with Instagram and even now, obviously short form video, and there's a place
Is it?
obviously for all of it, but our attention span, especially with Instagram, is like constant, short little videos.
Is it?
Why on websites? And maybe this is just my experience, and because I think we have high quality content, but I just don't find a lot of interaction with video on our websites compared to pictures. Is that something that you see as well, or is that just me?
Honestly, when I build websites, I try to really limit the amount of video I put on there for a number of reasons. I couldn't tell you the reason why people don't sit and watch a long form video. I think because there's other avenues for us to do that. Like for me, when I'm on a website, I don't even watch video. I'm like, if I want to watch a video, I'll go on YouTube or I'll watch a Instagram or a TikTok or whatever. It's just like
Okay.
where I can easily, I don't know. Uh,
Yeah.
I couldn't answer that question on why people don't.
But it echoes to be true in your experience as well.
Oh yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay.
When I'm installing, like I install Hotjar analytics or yeah, Hotjar is an analytic or a user behavior analytics tool. And when I install those on my client sites before I start on a new site for them, I can see on both desktop and mobile and tablet um, how people are navigating through the site. I can see every click. I can see how long they stay on a page, like just like what you were saying.
Right.
And it is so true. Like even you would be shocked at how fast they even go through portfolio images. Like if they
Right.
click on one and they're like literally swiping so fast, I'm like, did you even see the picture? And so I think, yeah, those things are just not something people are taking time to watch this full thing. I would say when you're able to have it on a site as a background video that's kind of short where visually you're seeing movement and you're seeing quick, cinematic snips of these different parts of the project or different projects or yeah, phases and things that you've done. I think that can be really effective rather than just static. But if you are going to be going through your site and there's a video and you push play and it's like 5 minutes long or
Right.
whatever,
I
yeah, people
I
aren't really.
now that you mention it, I like that a lot. Actually, I'm thinking
Yeah,
both of NS Builders, and now that you mentioned AFT, I wouldn't have called it out before, though notice it now that you're right, there's video kind of moving in the
the
background, and
autoplay. Yep.
they're very short form, if you will.
Mhm.
What do you, and and I can speak to my experience about this in a minute. How often do people rebrand versus scrap and redo
So,
versus
okay.
we're speaking specifically about their website?
Yeah, I was gonna say, funny enough, most of the people that I work with haven't even gone through a professional branding process.
Period. Okay, interesting.
Period. So, I've worked with a couple. Um, I'm not even sure that Brad did.
Yeah,
I
well,
think
I bring the reason I bring that up is we had a website, and then and this is where I think just having an expanded network, having other people help you, both as like, we call it management group or brand management or whoever is helping you on outside, because sometimes we get so focused on what we do, you lose sight of what you're doing, honestly.
Mhm.
And so I remember the first time I did a rebrand, they get you in with the price tag. I remember specifically Style Architects. It was a group of, I think, 9 ladies here in Minneapolis. My wife put me onto them and they were amazing.
Mhm.
I think it went from $3,500 to like 20 grand because
Mhm.
it was not a rebrand. I needed a reboot.
Oh,
And so,
yeah,
and I
for
was
sure.
happy that, they start with the rebrand, but by the time you redesign the whole website, there's nothing left. It's frankly just easier. And then it became very analogous to the difference between remodeling and tearing a house down and building a new one, which is primarily what we do in our area. So it's
Yeah.
like, this makes totally sense. Why try to restructure this old website when you can just
Yeah.
start a new one? And I just went through this 2 years ago. Again, had a great website, and the technology tools have changed too on the web
Mhm.
builder side. And obviously templates, and there's a bunch of stuff that you can do, but knowing what to do with it, is a whole nother talent. Anyway, long story short, I went in for a rebrand, and I did refresh the rebrand, but I also decided to rebuild the entire website as well. So it's
Yeah.
it's it's interesting. And it sounds like that hasn't been your experience because most of your people are just getting it kind of first. I guess you're not doing rebrands, but I imagine that's going to be an evolving sector for you as your name gets bigger and bigger because there's a lot of established companies already out there, right?
Yeah, so like what you said with either tearing the house down and starting from scratch or remodeling, it's really difficult, especially when you get into these conversations of like, okay, why are you actually, if you came to me and got on a phone call with me, like one of the first questions I'm going to ask you is like, why this project and why now? Like, what are you
Right.
hoping to accomplish in this? So, and the answer is never as simple as like, oh, we just need to freshen up our or modernize our look. It's always deeper. It's like we're not getting the type of clients we want. We want this type of client. And then as all these things and these goals start coming out, I'm like, okay, just sprucing up some fonts or some colors or like adding different images is not going to help you get to where you're wanting to go. And honestly, like back earlier when I was earlier in my career and doing web design, I would do just kind of a lot of moving around and shifting things. And it's like, it's as much work, if not more, to do that than to start from scratch and actually have a clear vision and a clear
Yeah.
strategy forward for how this is going to be the most effective. Um, so I would say like more than 9 times out of 10, if things are really failing on the website side where you're either not getting inquiries or it doesn't relate to your values, your ideal client anymore, it's outdated, whatever, most of the time you need to start
New build.
completely
Do
new.
do you
Yeah.
do you offer, you're doing website design. How are you mentioned partners before, like let's say copyright,
Mm.
things like that. How are you actually managing people's brands as well? Or is that a resource or a person that you bring in? And the reason I bring it up is I'll just share my story. A couple years ago, as I mentioned, 2 years ago, actually, my wife had actually, this is the point of having people around you that can kind of, tell you things that I was like, I have a great brand. I love my brand. It's amazing. It's the best ever. And she's
Okay.
like, and my wife was like, well, it's great, but it's really your clients have taken you to a different place than your brand represents currently.
Mhm.
So it's not that there's anything wrong with your brand. It's just you're no longer your brand anymore. You've changed.
100%.
No different than
Yeah.
like you age. Now I have silver hair. My kids are very
Yep.
fascinated by this color in my hair. And and so anyway, my kids actually found a photo of me at my parents' house recently, and I was blonde as a kid. And
Oh
my
man.
daughter is just enamored that I had blonde hair. And so she took up my high school photo and she held it next to me last night in bed, and she's like, I mean, I can kind of tell your face and your nose are the same, Dad, but your hair does not look the same. And so anyway, speaking of the
Yeah.
brand refresh, I guess I need a new dad brand. But anyway, the point is like, I had to work. The website was not my first stop. I went with a brand strategist.
Yeah.
We did naming conventions, we did brand and font, and like you really sort of, that helped you dig into like, who is your client? And then you look back, you're like, wow, I have really transcended who I was before, not by any deliberate thought or action, but really that was just the journey I was on.
Yep.
And it can go either way. I mean, you can go up, you can go down, you can go just to a different place too. Can you speak a little bit to how you adjust company's brand and what resources you would bring to the table on that? Because a website is not just a website. There's so much more that
Oh,
goes into it.
yeah, 100%. And I am not a brand strategist or a brand designer. So, when I have clients coming to me who have not gone through this process, I mean, I have limited knowledge in that space where I can give them the basics of, we're going to take your online presence from here to here. But my area of expertise is the strategy of the website. It is not the strategy of your brand. It's not your story. It's not who you are, like the essence of who you are. I'm not, I dig into who your ideal client is and who you want to serve for the website strategy elements of things, but not for um, the visual. I mean, I do visual things, but like in a perfect world, somebody would come to me with all of that already, the brand strategy. So, for example, I'm trying to think. I would recommend working with a brand strategist first because, like you said, they're going to get to the heart and soul of who you are as a company, where you want to go, really dig deep into who are your clients, and then they're really good at taking a little bit of who you are and what you like, but pushing you to the side a little bit and saying, this is the visual direction that's going to resonate best with your clients. And
Yeah.
so, and bring that art to life in a way that's super effective. I tend to, more often than not, with the clients that I work with, we go the story brand route is usually the messaging is a little bit more important to them. And we do dig into those things too. So when I partner with Paul or any of my story brand guides, they're asking very similar questions. They're just crafting written content out of it rather than visual content. So that still has a very powerful effect. But your brand is every way that you show up online and in person. It's visual, it's written content, it's your website, it's everything. And so you really have to try to plan for all the pieces and don't expect your website designer to say, "What do I write here?" or do my logo. Like some do, but they're very different. Like an architect is not a builder and a builder is not an interior designer. Like sometimes there's overlap, but a lot of times there's not. So you need to make sure you have all the pieces together to make it the most effective and like successful project as possible.
I think it reminded me too, just when you're saying that. And I've always enjoyed having very thick, inflexible cards that are very bold, and even the edges of my card have a color. And I
Love it.
get a lot of satisfaction out of handing. I think I can only fit 3 in my wallet
Yeah.
at a time because they're so thick. But without fail, every single time I hand someone a card, and it's funny, we're in a digital age, but there is something, even though they probably just look at it and throw it away, it's that first reaction of when they touch it and feel it. Every single person does the same thing, like, "Ooh," and they'll kind of like wave it like it's a piece
Quality.
of wood, like, "Wow, that's thick." And
Yeah.
it reminds me of 2 things. One is my dad built homes for 30 years back in the 70s and 80s, and I remember one time he told me the story that comes to me now, where he would spend more money, or I think maybe he would gift the client a really over the top, expensive and heavy duty front doorknob. And his thought process is that every single guest that comes to that home is gonna press down on that lever. It's the first thing they touch on
Gonna-
a home. It's not the first thing they see, it's the first thing they touch. And he wanted it to be very solid, very sturdy, and he was already thinking about the idea that if their front door knob or handle is this solid, how great must this builder be?
Oh,
And I
yeah.
don't know if anyone ever
You know, like
consciously
every
thinks that.
detail in that house. Yeah.
And I've always sort of enjoyed that about thinking about a card, but I think the website is a digital manifestation of something physical like a card. A
It
lot of
is.
people, you judge people and you are judged, right or wrong. I'm not saying one way of
Mhm.
passing a judgment on the judgment, but you get judged by your website 100%.
Oh, yeah.
And so make sure it represents you. I mean, I
It
think
still
that's
to this day, like, affects where I go for like, even out to eat.
mhm.
My husband and my 2 boys are taking me out for my birthday/Mother's Day on Sunday, and so my husband had brought up some brunch places we could go to, and I was, like, bringing up websites, and literally just if a website is not appealing or updated, I'm like, it puts a picture in your mind. It's like, oh, well, their food must like if I
Right?
go to a website and I see these delicious dishes and like kind of like a vibe of what I can anticipate going into this website or website restaurant and experiencing, you get it evokes that feeling and that emotion of like, oh, this place I have to go to. And it could be anything from their colors to like the pictures they use to their fonts is like that's the vibe. That's what I want to do on Sunday. It has an incredible effect, like
It does,
stronger
and
than you
I
think
think
it
it
could.
can be simple. Like, I think
Oh, yeah.
sometimes maybe people listening are like, "Oh, man, I have to spend all this money to make it super complicated." I've seen
No.
I think actually that's the hard part, to your point earlier. If your website becomes the Cheesecake Factory menu,
Yeah.
you lose people, and, that's a huge turnoff for me, and I understand that there is some, money on the back end, if you allow ads to be run on your website and all that stuff. I find
And
it incredibly distracting, and so
yes, and
that's
it slows the site down and it's
yeah,
hard to navigate through it. Yeah.
but a question for you brought up earlier, and I wanted to bring it up now, which was you had mentioned SEO, and
Yeah.
think most people know it's search engine optimization, but very few people know how to actually do it and what it actually means. But
Yeah.
can you speak just broadly why it's important, why it changes, and then let's talk specifically here as we sort of wrap up about the power of blogs, and I'll share kind of what I've
Yeah.
experienced, but just because I thought that was something that my wife reads. I mean, I definitely don't read blogs, and now I'm like, I love a good blog, and we push out an incredible amount of blogs. I sometimes get concerned that I'm pushing too many out because if you think too much like that, everyone's like you, obviously, this is why you need people around you that can give you out different points of view. I'm like, well, I don't read them. So if I don't read them, nobody else must. But
Right.
obviously that's wrong because people,
Or
yeah, go
or
ahead.
they don't read them in the way you think that they do. So
Right.
I would say for me, like, I'm not a blog reader. I'm not just gonna like go onto a website that has a blog and just start like open up an
Okay.
article and just start reading. So, but I am on blogs every single day because for my business, whether I'm researching something or advancing my education, or sometimes it sounds silly, but like I'll have a client, they're like, oh, I want this special functionality on my website. I'm not a web developer, which means like I didn't go to school to learn coding, but I use coding in all of my websites to enhance features and design elements and things like that. So I might be searching something on Google, like how to do this functionality on a website. And I'm looking for the code, and the codes for those are placed within blog posts. That's like, here's how to do this on your website, and their blog post format. I'm scrolling through them. I'm looking for the code. They might have a little video tutorial or a little explanation. So they have a blog post 500, 1,000, 1,500 words long. I'm not reading that whole thing, but I've still visited their site. I've still established them as like, oh, these people are go-to people if I have coding questions. So they're not reading them in the way that you think that they might, but they have populated in a search result for what I was looking for. They solved my problem. And then I bookmark a lot of those sites to come back to later, which then they usually offer other services or have products that I might buy in the future, because I trust them now. They've proven to be, a resource for me. So they might not just be going on markdwilliams.com and just reading any, whatever blog post and reading the whole thing. But especially with like search results, if you wrote a blog post about something that someone was searching for and that showed up at the top of the search engines, now all of a sudden somebody's on your website for a topic that they were looking up. They might not have even known your company or your custom home building company existed, but now they do. They're on your site because you're talking about something that somebody's searched for. So that relevant content is super important, and blog great tool for that. For
What
driving
in
traffic.
your experience, I guess, two questions along this line. If obviously people are coming to you for help, but I mean, let's use
Yeah.
Brad. I mean, Brad had a good website before. He has a much better one now, but it's not like he had a terrible one, or maybe he did. I don't remember. But I guess my question is, if you had to rate people in the good, better, best categories,
Okay.
what percentage? Let's just use builders because that's your target market. Where do you if you had to tell me right now in the audience, like, what percentages would you rate of the websites out there in terms of, maybe we should put bad in there, bad, good, better, best? Where would you rate the different websites that are out there as a general rule that currently exist?
Yeah, I would say probably 10% are best. Good. I would say most fall in good. Most have a lot of good things going on, and they're maybe missing just some best practices to really take them to better. So I would say probably let's put 60% in good, 10% in best. What does that leave?
Yeah, you got 30% left.
Mm,
So
okay, so 10 in better, and then what is that? 20 in
yeah.
bad,
So
like
I
really
mean,
bad.
yeah. I was just curious. I'm a little surprised that good
Yeah.
was that high. I would have suspected that bad and terrible were actually much higher than they
Now
were.
I'm speaking from a custom home builder um place. Like there's a lot of home builders, but even between home builders and like I would say I work with more like on the luxury side.
Sure. Yeah.
There's also a big difference there too. So
Yep.
I don't know. That's what I would say.
Okay, I was just curious, and like of
Just like
so
off the
like
top of my head,
of
that's hard to do
no
like
of
ratios.
yeah, well, it's just more of a check-in thing.
Yeah.
Um, of the all the builders you work with before you come online, especially talking about SEO, how many of them are paying for Google paid for clicks, and also how many are already have a blog, and then how many have a that will start a blog after they work with you?
I would say most of the people that I work with are doing nothing for SEO. So they're not paying, they're
Mhm.
not working with an agency. And I understand it too. Like there's a lot of unknowns in SEO. There's a lot of mistrust in SEO. Like you said, you get those emails from spammers all the time. SEO changes all the time. And so I feel like it's really hard to find a reputable or an honest or just kind of like a company that's realistic about SEO. So I can understand why they stay away from it. But in general, like I would say maybe 5% of people I've worked with have some background in SEO where they've gotten their traffic's really great. They're ranking high on Google. One company that I'm working with right now has done a phenomenal job in a market that's very competitive. But they've also been around for 40 plus years. So they've got a lot of um rapport and time and experience built.
What is it hard along speaking of a longevity, so let's say you've had a company for a long period of time. I'll use my 2 companies. Mark Williams Custom Homes has been around
Mhm.
for 20 years, and the Curious Builder's been around for 2 years. Um, should an older company have higher website traffic than a younger company, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily, no. The a the age of the domain, so, like, when you bought the domain name, you created your website, there is some of that factors into ranking on Google, like, because you've been online longer, but if that's all you have and you're not doing anything else with your SEO, no. Like, your Curious Builder podcast could rank, you know,
Well, that's
as
where I
high
was
as you
going.
want it to, much faster than a company that's been around
Well
for 100 years. It doesn't,
Well, and
yeah.
I didn't know I didn't and yeah, and I can share my story and analytics briefly on that as well. Part of it is, Mark Williams Custom Homes is, a local Minneapolis builder, right? So, I mean, I build, a handful of homes a year, and I can't, unfortunately, I'd love to build in other parts of the world, but I don't.
Mhm.
That being said, we do consulting and other things outside of that. That's a new thing. But my question is that like the Curious Builder podcast, and I got totally lucky that, if you type in construction podcast. I actually don't know where I rank. You could Google it now, but if you type in builder podcast, I'm usually top 3, but I
Yeah.
got lucky because Curious
How do you think
Builder
I found you?
Podcast. Yeah, I mean, exactly. I got 2 of the 3 words are in my title, which was
Uh-huh.
complete luck. But the other thing that I complimented my team about is because for the last 2 years, every single episode, I mean, because of the podcast, well, obviously most people are downloading it and listening to it
Okay.
on, Spotify or Apple
Yeah.
or wherever they're downloading it. um we publish every single episode
In a
that
blog.
week on a blog post. And
Mhm.
this was another thing. This is totally my ignorance. I thought a blog post was like someone sat down and really wrote out a script, like reading like a news article. And it can be that, and it
Yeah.
often is. But it also, a blog is just like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's pretty much just copyright. Just writing, whether it has pictures or not, also doesn't matter. It's just like
Mhm.
something that you're regularly updating. 'Cause Google just wants, it's like a giant monster.
He wants fresh
It just
content. Just
wants
keep feeding
content.
it.
And so I have seen our Curious Builder website just skyrocket
Mhm.
because it's getting in a crazy amount of fresh content weekly, you
Yeah.
know. And now because of that, we now do I think we're up to maybe bi-weekly on Mark Williams Custom Homes. But then of course, if
Yeah.
you're updating your website with, land for sale or model homes,
Mhm.
and because of now, of course, you have to manage Instagram and Pinterest and YouTube and all these other things. It's a full-time job. I mean, for a
Yeah.
small company, I'm like, wow, I spend a disproportionate amount of time, but I also like it. So and that's
Yeah.
probably also
That's
what I
good.
enjoy. And so I'm just curious, I think sometimes it can be overwhelming for builders and really for any business owner. They're like, man, there's so many platforms to manage.
Yeah.
And I've been told repeatedly over and over again that at the end of the day, you own your website and you own your email list. And I wasn't
Mhm.
until recently that I even realized that there was value in that. And that,
Mhm.
to what your earlier comment was about the landscaper in Washington, that you would build a following and then sell those leads. At some point, if you retain your email list, that's worth something. And
Oh,
that was just so far from my thinking, like, why would I develop an email list? Like, why would I do that?
because it's got the highest conversion rate out of any marketing technique you could use over ads, over radio, over print.
Right.
I don't, yeah, it's like the stats on email marketing is insane. And we all hate it. Like, we subscribe to something because we want to download something, and then we get the emails and blah, blah,
And
blah.
then
And
we
maybe
hate
it's
it.
just we're not
Yeah.
interested. And so we unsubscribe. But for those warm leads, like people who actually are interested, they're your ideal client, you've provided a resource and they're on your list, they do care. They're not just unsubscribing super quickly, especially if you're offering more helpful content through your email list. And it doesn't have to be every week, like every couple weeks, once a month, whatever it is, just kind of like keep warming them up. Oh man, yeah, the success rate and the conversion rates on those are like
Well,
blow everything else out of the
Well, and
water.
I didn't even know this was a thing either. I mean, recently we have a local land development called Honey Hill up in Orono in Minnesota. And, we used a local company
It is.
to do a dedicated email blast. And they charge, significant amount of money,
Yep.
several $1,000s. And
Yep.
I think they were boasting that their email following was 30,000. But their click rate and their open rate was extremely high. And
Uh-huh.
we did two simultaneously. We did one with a lower cost in a lower yield, but it had a higher open rate. And it was just really interesting to see that in action. And we got 1,000 hits on our website for
Yeah.
in one day. And I
Yeah.
was like, whoa, that's a lot of eyeballs,
Yes.
versus like, and at least you can track it. And now, have we gotten anything out of it? No.
Right.
But it's hard to
Yeah.
say if that'll resurface later. And
Right.
then I think
Yeah.
like I think, and not that print is dead. I think, especially the magazines love to tell you
Yes.
that, oh, we want to do a combo package, that it's the big, they like, if I am told one more time about the sales funnel, I'm going to have to eat the funnel and put some powdered sugar on
Or
it,
like
because it's like,
a
they're
golf
always talking.
course ad.
Yeah, no, it's like that. No, and I get why they're doing it.
Yeah,
I would too, but
yeah.
it's like and I'm not saying they're completely wrong either, but it's, hey, you have a magazine, and some of your money should go to a magazine ad, and then some of it should go to a digital ad, and all of it
And
together is your brand. I agree with that. It's also hard to justify because it's so hard to prove analytics. And I
yes.
talked to other builders and other
Right.
businesses, how often do you pay, four, five, six, seven, $8,000 for an ad, a spread? It becomes a lot of money,
Yeah.
where you can do some serious damage digitally with that money, even,
Yeah.
far less money, far less investment. And and especially if it lives on a blog or someone else's
Mhm.
website, it stays there. Or once it's in a magazine, it might lay on someone's table for a month until the next issue comes out, or a quarter, or
Yeah.
whatever it is, and then it's gone. And
And I
again,
would
what's your thoughts on kind of that whole industry? Or is
uh
that podcast number two?
yeah, I'm not sure. I was just gonna give a tip for if you are doing print advertising, because I agree with you. I don't think it's dead. Like, there are just people consume information in different ways. Um, but a tip to help at least somewhat track, you can like get a tracking phone number that routes to your
Mm,
office phone or wherever you want it to go. There's platforms like Call Sling and Call Rail, and you can get in, and there's plenty of other ones, but get a tracking phone number and use that phone number in your print ads. That way, when you get a phone call, you know it's from a print ad.
that's a
Like,
good
you
way.
can
And I
get a
think,
phone number for a magazine, you can get a separate phone number for a billboard, or you can get a separate phone number for like if you run a radio ad. And then all of them, you say, okay, this phone number is this, but this phone number is this, and you can then see what calls are coming from what source.
you can do
That would
that.
be my
You can do that.
recommendation
You can
there.
do that with QR codes, correct?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I think that's how
Generate different QR
yeah,
codes.
we've done different QR codes so that we could track it on the back
Yes.
end that way.
Yeah. So that would be my recommendation to anybody who's doing print, just so you can, like, knowing your numbers is so important, because sometimes like we think like, oh, like everything's fine, but like, what would it take to get your company from like good to great? It might not actually be as much as you think it would, and make a huge difference just by knowing your numbers and then setting some goals like, okay, we're here. I want to, like, let's strive for this. And then take a path and see like what it will take to get there.
Right.
Um, I don't know. That's just always my biggest piece of advice, is actually knowing what your numbers are across, the board. So,
Mhm.
and then putting more
Well,
resources into the things that are working. Yeah.
right. Well, we're out of time. I want to respect your time as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming on and sharing your story and your business with our
Yeah.
audience.
This is
And
fun.
I hope you get a big uptick of people interested. Usually, what does that sales cycle look like for you? I didn't ask that question in terms of by the time someone calls you or gets funneled through your website. How long does it usually take? in terms of like either queue of how many jobs you can even handle at a time? What does that look
Yeah,
like?
so my business has been going through a big shift. I have well, I'm due with my third baby in like 7 weeks.
Oh,
So
congratulations.
thank you. My business got booked out basically in February until my maternity leave. So I have not been taking on new clients. I've been booking new clients for the fall now. So I'm in a new transition too, where it is just me currently at least doing the website development and design. So one thing I'm working on for when I come back is hiring a junior designer to join my team so that I can take on more projects. But I've really limited myself to projects because I like working one-on-one with my clients to give them the best experience and also get them the best results. Also, I have a young family, so I only work so many hours in a week. So yeah, it depends. But yeah, right now I'm booking into fall of 24 and getting some websites up before 2025. I also have my new template for builders out. It's a Squarespace website template that I designed to just really help more people that maybe aren't a good fit for my custom packages, but still need, a professional website that converts and that's built for kind of like a higher end market. And it's got the best practice strategies in place. And so I'm trying to put other, products and services in place to help as many people as possible with my limited amount of hands. But
Right.
we
Well,
might be
that's great.
hiring in the future, which is like a new venture for me that I'm very
That's very
nervous about.
exciting. Oh, that's
Is
very exciting.
exciting but nervous. It's like I respect anybody who runs a business and has employees, and because that's a whole nother level of business and managing people and processes and stuff, making sure the quality is still there. So
Yeah. Well, thanks again. We'll have all your contact information
yeah.
in the show notes. For those looking, is it just CatlynSlocumDesign.com?
Yep. And
Okay.
Katlyn is spelled Catlin. No E's,
Very
no
good.
I's.
Very good. Well, thanks again. And
Thank you.
thanks for tuning into the Curious Builder podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Curious Builder podcast. If you like what you listen to, please give us a 5-star rating and write us a review. It really means a lot. It's a great way for us to just understand what you like about the podcast and what we can keep doing. So like and review, and please share with your friends and family. Find out more at CuriousBuilderPodcast.com.